Hi, I'm Brett McCracken. I'm a film critic for Christianity Today, and I work with Biola's Center for Christianity, Culture, and the Arts. And I'm also the author of the recently released book, Gray Matters, which, among other things, looks at how Christians can better engage and think about film in a healthy way. So today we're here to talk about the movie Noah, Darren Aronofsky's controversial movie Noah. I'm here with Dr. Stan Williams. Dr. Williams has a Bachelor of Arts in Physics, a Master's in Mass Communications, and a doctorate in Narrative Theory. He's a veteran filmmaker, television producer, distributor, been in the business for about 40 years. He's known in Hollywood as a script and story consultant. He's worked with people like Will Smith on scripts. He's known for his book, The Moral Premise, Harnessing Virtue and Vice for Box Office Success. And over the last few years, you worked with the Biola Media Conference on the Great Conversation in Cinema series, which kind of interviews filmmakers, producers, writers, actors about their craft. And this conversation kind of stemmed from that. We had a conversation at the Biola Media Conference a few weeks ago about Noah, and it was a 15-minute conversation, so a little too short to tackle a very complex film. So we thought we would continue that conversation today. Just getting at some of the controversy surrounding Noah. So thank you for being here,
Thanks a lot,
Stan.
I'm really glad to be here.
So I thought maybe we could get started with our conversation by just talking about why this film has sparked the passionate responses that it has on, both people who hate the movie and think that it's heresy and have written scathing blog articles just denouncing it, saying that Christians shouldn't support the film. If they do support it, they're kind of being duped by this propaganda. And then on the other hand, you have Christians like myself who quite liked the film and wrote a really positive review, and I think you liked the film as well.
It very much, yeah.
So why is this film so divisive within Christianity, and why is it creating such passionate responses?
Well, I've got some of my theories, and I'm sure you do too. One of my theories is that the movie is very dark.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of Christians weren't ready for that.
Yeah.
They're ready for the stuffed animal mobile circling over the baby's crib, and the little flannel graphs,
yeah.
Right, that sort of stuff. And yet Aronofsky talks about how when he was age 10, he first heard the story of Noah. Mm-hmm. His first thoughts were, my goodness, what about all those people that died? Yeah. I mean, this is apocalyptic.
Right.
And it's dark.
Mm-hmm.
And the Bible doesn't really go into that, and we tend to think of great prophets like Noah and Moses and all this sort of stuff. We don't think of Moses and all the Egyptians that died in the Red Sea. We think of Moses in his kindly sort of, robes or something, saving the Israelites. Well, Noah saved his family, but there were, I don't know how many people died, but maybe not in the millions. It was 10 generations after Adam and Eve, if you believe the genealogy literally. But hundreds of thousands. And the picture that is in the film, the image that Aronofsky saw as a 10-year-old, is hundreds of people on a mountaintop yelling for help, and they're drowning. They're falling on the rocks and in the water. And Noah hears this inside the ark.
Right.
And it's scary.
Right.
And Aronofsky talks about how, when he was a kid, he says, I hope I'm good enough to get on the ark.
Would I get on the boat?
Yeah, will I get on the boat? So I think that is just a shock.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a good shock. Mm-hmm. I think it wakes us up as Christians as to, are you going to be good enough? And it's not so much that we're going to earn our way into heaven, but nonetheless, we are obligated as Christians to obey God.
Right.
And when we don't, there's going to be consequences.
Right.
And we see this very consequential event early in the Bible, very early in the Bible.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you on all of that, and I think the expectations and kind of the unexpected elements that Christians maybe weren't familiar with or didn't expect to see really threw people for a loop. And it's like, what are these rock monsters doing? What is that? Like, why is Noah such a mean person? Like, that doesn't seem like the story that I know. So I think the way that Aronofsky subverted our expectations, both caused people to react strongly against it. But I think part of the power of the movie is exactly that it subverts our expectations, but to me that can be a healthy thing because it forces us to re-examine the story and to think about it in a new way. And the reality of the Noah story is that it is a dark story. It's the entire population of the earth is wiped out, aside from a few people that God spares. And so, yeah, that image of the people on the rock you know, who are just flailing around, being knocked off by waves, and then you have Noah and his family in the quietness of the ark, but they hear the screams, and it's that juxtaposition of God's wrath and God's mercy in protecting this family. I think that the film does a great job of capturing those two themes, which show up throughout the film and throughout the Bible. God is a God of mercy and justice, and we have to have both.
Yeah, and there's that balance that, you know, Noah struggles with. If I could talk, my expertise in Hollywood is not theology, but it's story structure. Yeah. And there is one aspect of all of Aronofsky's films that I think contribute to their not being as popular. And when I've talked with other Christians who ultimately like the film, but there's a structural problem with his films that do not meet general audience expectations. And in popular motion pictures and novels, there's something in the midpoint of the story called the moment of grace. That's my term for it. Other people have the different terms, but it's the same point. And it's the point at which the protagonist, in this case Noah, is supposed to, in terms of what the audience is expecting, turn from pursuing his goal through a negative or viceful motivation, in this case, not revengeful justice, but just justice, harsh justice. And midpoint, something happens in the story that the protagonist says, oh, wait a minute, there's another way to go about this. I'm not really achieving my goal through justice, maybe mercy. And so he turns to the opposing value, which is the virtue and mercy, and then he struggles to accomplish his goal through the rest of the movie. So if you take a protagonist like Noah, and you halfway through the movie, you turn him, and the audience sees this. It's not real dramatic, but it's subtle, and the audience says, oh, he's now trying to, whatever his goal is, save his family through mercy. Then we might more readily embrace his dark side. But Aronofsky doesn't do that. Right. All his films, he has his protagonists go to the bitter end, and sometimes they die at the end, and they're tragedies, like in The Wrestler, or possibly Black Swan. I don't know whether Natalie Portman's character really dies or not, but I mean, these are tragedies. And to a certain extent, Pi is like that. So he pushes us. And I would say that you could easily describe Noah as a near tragedy. I mean, there's this wonderful redemptive end, but he waits for the last 4 minutes of a 2+ hour movie. And so that tragedies never play well with audiences. And I think that's another big thing that people don't get. What about the whole midrash stuff? Do you think that threw people off?
You know, yeah, I think that the fact that for Darren Aronofsky, the Bible wasn't the sole text. You know, he used Jewish midrash, he used apocryphal text, the Book of Enoch, etc. Yeah, that threw people off. For evangelicals, we are such people of the book. You know, we are sola scriptura, like the Bible is our authority. It's our sole source of authority, and everything else is, you know, suspicious and shouldn't be viewed in any sort of authoritative sense, which you know is true. But when you're telling a story, and the story of Noah in the Bible is pretty short, and there's a lot of gaps and things that we don't know. We don't know what happened on the ark. What were the conversations like? What was going through the mind of Noah? What were the Nephilim exactly? That's not spelled out clearly in the book of Genesis. And so I think Aronofsky wisely did research into everything he could. The Epic of Gilgamesh, you know, all of these other texts that mention a flood story, the Jewish tradition of midrash. He drew upon all of it to kind of fill in some of these gaps to the best that he could. And I think that threw some Christian evangelical viewers off.
But at the same time, regardless of your Christian denominational viewpoint, we use, the Bible is our text that we hold as infallible, inerrant, right? Although I guess technically only the original texts are. But the translations we have are totally trustworthy. And so we can look to them. But we tend to, like you say, look only at those. But at the same time, there's all sorts of other traditions in Christendom, both Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, wherever you go, that help us to interpret those scriptures and make sense of them. Sure. And so Midrash is one of them. The Kabbalah, the Jewish mysticism of Kabbalah, which is different, I should point out, and maybe we should talk about this on another segment, from the pagan Kabbalah that Madonna and other people have made popular over the last couple decades.
The pop Kabbalah
today, the pop Kabbalah, there you go, stuff like that. So yeah, that's too bad, because I think there's a lot of good stuff to get us to think about. In Christian tradition, there's the whole concept of contemplation, where you put yourself in a scene in the New Testament or the Old scene. You try to, you're quiet, you get alone, and you try to imagine being at the Last Supper, you know, and what does it feel like? What does it smell like? What's going on? What do you hear? And you repeat the words of the biblical text, but then you derive some sort of truth out of that. And it's not truth that you're going to get up and preach about, but it's stuff that helps you understand the tenor and the emotions and what is being said. Right. And it makes it personal. So it's not really vision, but it's kind of like a personal midrash, I suppose. And it helps you connect with who Jesus was and why he came.
And I think that's the power of film, is that it can visualize and help us to empathize with characters in a way that is maybe harder when you're just reading words on a page. And I think that's one thing that Aronofsky does well in Noah, and Russell Crowe does it amazingly well with his acting, is that I really felt for Noah in this kind of crazy task that he felt like he was getting from God, and the tough things that he was being asked to do, and that he thought that he had to kill his baby granddaughters. It really, it makes you think about just the difficulty of following after Christ and taking up one's cross, and counting the cost of obedience, whatever that is. I
struggle with that every day, Brett. I really do. You know, God doesn't speak to us loudly. Don't do that, do this. You kind of wish he would. I remember in was it Bruce Almighty, where Bruce says, God, just give me a sign, and you see a truck drive by in the background with a bunch of traffic signs on it. Then he gets hit by a bus. Well, that's God talking when you get hit by a bus, because you shouldn't be kneeling in the middle of the street in bus traffic, you know, like common sense. I think one of the other things, too, that disturb Christians is that being people of the Word, so to speak, we feel most comfortable with what I call propositional statements. Right. These are statements of Christian doctrine. Jesus saves. Okay, that's something that is true in a universal sense. It's true throughout time and places, and we feel comfortable with those, you know, short phrases. You know, there's sound bites, right? That tell us what is true. But the problem with propositional statements are that they're universal, where when you're telling a story, the story is linear in time, chronological. They're not universal in terms of time. And a story is particular. It's not universal for everybody. It may be true for this character in this situation. And so we get really uncomfortable with narrative, because narrative, when properly done, causes the audience to emotionally identify with the characters. And there's a bunch of techniques that filmmakers use to put the audience inside the protagonist or the other characters' heads, you know, so that you're starting to make decisions with the characters and say, oh, do that, don't do that. And so you become emotionally engaged, and when something happens, you watch the natural consequences and you learn. You learn through simulation. It's like we learn best through experience. Well, going to a movie is like learning through simulation. So, but the problem for Christians in that, is that it requires the audience to interpret the meaning. Right. You have to come away. So it takes a really good filmmaker to put up all these anecdotal scenes on the screen and consistently portray them. And that's kind of what my book is about, the moral premise, that you consistently portray the moral premise in every scene, every character's arc, so that at the end of the movie, you get what it's about. So like Noah's clearly about finding the balance between justice and mercy. God figured it out before it all happened. But Noah has to figure it out, and it's a tough thing to do. And so I think that's sometimes too why we see a lot of films made by Christians who are very didactic.
Right.
They're very preachy.
Right.
They're telling you what you're supposed to believe. And I think that's because Christians are just not comfortable with narrative in terms of deriving truth from that. And it is difficult.
Right.
It's a lot easier to say, well, here, let's quote this scripture in that scene and quote this scripture in that scene. But that doesn't engage the audience, because the audience, when you use didactic techniques like that, the audience isn't emotionally involved in the characters' lives, and you lose them.
Right.
So I think that's a really big thing as to why just Christians generally aren't comfortable with narrative unless it's like the Gospel of John, we're using word for word, stuff like that.